It's October 30th, 1938, and Orson Welles is about to take to the microphone to deliver a radio program for Mercury Theaters that will literally be talked about to this very day. And that program is War of the Worlds.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
For years, the Dos Equis, I don't know how to say it, beer company did a commercial featuring the most interesting man in the world. And he had done all these amazing things, comical commercials. To me, though, the most interesting man in the world has always been and always will be Orson Welles. And that's putting it mildly. He's one of the most interesting people that I've ever witnessed on film, on interviews. I'll literally spend hours watching interviews of Orson Welles. I never grow tired of it. The man talks like no one else.
That as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water.
Sadly, at the age of 70, in 1985, Orson Welles died. I was only 2 years old, so I never really got to appreciate him in his time. And I'm afraid that he was never appreciated truly in his time, except for during a brief period that we'll talk about later on. But what I want to talk about now is when he literally scared a good portion of the United States. But we're going to get into a little bit of how many people did he actually scare and how many were actually fooled by this fake news broadcast. So basically, he did an adaptation of the War of the Worlds, and he did it as a news broadcast. He had different people playing reporters and journalists. And if you were to have missed the introduction, it would have sounded to you as if there was an actual news broadcast going on. And during this news broadcast, it's interrupted by breaking news of an alien spacecraft landing. And I've listened to it many times, and every time it gives me chills. The thought of an alien, a Martian invasion is what it's called in the War of the Worlds, and just the thought of that has always creeped me out. So basically, these creatures start coming out of this spaceship that's discovered. On and on it goes to eventually local officials in the town, under a flag of truce, try to go and communicate with the Martians, and they're just destroyed, incinerated. And so basically, if you were listening to that and missed the introduction and caught it during the news broadcast part of it, you would have had about 40 minutes or so of uninterrupted simulated news broadcast. And if you listen to that before the first station break, I mean, you think about if you listen to the radio now, they have station breaks, I mean, every few minutes. So just almost 40 minutes of uninterrupted simulated breaking news of an alien invasion. So, did Orson Welles cause a panic in the United States? Not really. He did, however, cause a panic among a good number of listeners to Mercury Theaters. So much so that he actually had to apologize through the media to the country for causing such fear and confusion. And that's just legendary to me. That's legendary. I'm a guy that likes a good scare, and Orson Welles went into this broadcast with the intention of scaring people, with the intention of making people believe that there was actually an alien invasion happening. Now, he could have gotten serious trouble. He didn't, but the FCC did investigate, and the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission. And they investigated, and they vowed, I mean literally vowed, that they would put a stop, an end to all simulated news broadcasts. In the middle of this investigation, though, CBS, which aired Mercury Theatre's broadcast, agreed to limit or do away altogether with simulated news broadcasts. But Orson Welles did have to give an apology. So yeah, it wasn't mass panic. It's the same old story. There were people that got scared, a good number of people that got scared, but the mainstream media blew it up like the whole country was in hysteria over this broadcast. So they were doing what they do today, blowing things up out of proportion. But he did put a good scare on some people. Now, Orson Welles, just to talk about him in brief, was always called a genius since he was a child. He had a very interesting life. You can look it up yourself, but at the young age of 25, he was given carte blanche. I mean, he was unlimited funds to create a movie called Citizen Kane. And if you just Google, if you want to, greatest movies of all time, Citizen Kane is usually number one, and for good reason. It's one of my favorite movies. It's really a good movie for if you like classic movies now. And I love classic movies. But Citizen Kane is absolutely excellent. He plays Charles Foster Kane, and he's basically ripping off William Randolph Hearst in this movie. And he does a good job of it. But he made the perfect movie. He really did. But he's made so many good movies. He made Lady from Shanghai and that infamous mirror scene. But the thing they said destroyed him was when he made a movie called Touch of Evil. And the critics didn't like that movie, and they literally destroyed him over it. He could hardly get another job directing, and he became the consummate independent director. But that's fine, because he still made some of the greatest movies of all time. One being one of my favorites. I might like this movie better than Citizen Kane, honestly. It's called The Stranger, and he plays a Nazi that's hiding out after the war in America, and he's a teacher. He does an excellent job. You really ought to watch The Stranger. You should watch any movie, really, that Orson Welles has directed. But if I had to give you three, I would definitely say Citizen Kane, The Stranger, and Touch of Evil would be a good choice. He makes cameos in plenty of movies, like Moby Dick and A Man for All Seasons, different movies like that. He made some Shakespearean plays, just really excellent. But I could talk about him forever, but he is definitely one of my heroes. Definitely the greatest showman that's ever lived, and just a man of immense talent. And what's sad is he was ridiculed his whole life after a certain point when he started gaining weight. And he gained a lot of weight, and that's all that people ever focused on. I'm a fat guy myself, I understand. But the brilliance of this man was just absolutely uncanny. But what he did with War of the Worlds was legendary. Pulling off a stunt like that. And if you hear some of his stories that he tells in some of his interviews of different people that he's met in his life and different experiences, it'll blow your mind. And a lot of people will try to disprove some of the things he says. Listen, I don't care if 90% of what came out of his mouth was a lie. It was still a pleasure listening to it. So if you get a chance, listen to the War of the Worlds broadcast. The War of the Worlds movie with Tom Cruise was pretty good too. I mean, honestly, you can't go wrong with War of the Worlds in general. But Orson Welles should be the main focus when you speak of War of the Worlds. And the day that he caused a ruckus by confusing and scaring a lot of people, sparking FCC investigations and all that stuff, that's just amazing. It really is. And so anybody that's into horror and a good scare should appreciate someone like Orson Welles that can pull that off at a somewhat national level. You have to remember, it probably would have been a bigger deal than it was, but radio was still in its infancy. I mean, it was still, not everybody owned a radio, not everybody had the access to it. It was still a young genre. So had more people had radios, he probably would have caused mass hysteria in the country. But he would have had a blast doing it, and I would have a blast talking about it. So thank you for listening to this vlog from What's Haunting the Hearst. Guys, we're at over 140 subscribers now. We've got more than 26,000 views. Can you even fathom that? 26,000 views. Dropping 2 videos today. I wanted to drop a video yesterday, but I couldn't. I wasn't inspired. I have to be inspired to make a video. And I promised to make 2 vlogs every week. And I started shooting 2 videos, and I would talk about something I thought I wanted to talk about, and I would end up cursing the camera and turning it off. And I thought of it today. Orson Welles and the War of the Worlds. And I hope you enjoyed the subject. I hope you look into it yourself a little bit, watch some of his movies, listen to some of his interviews, and I think you'll come out an Orson Welles fan. Thank you again, and join us Friday for our Friday vlog that we're always going to drop a video on Fridays, if the Lord is willing. We're going to drop a music fan tribute for a Toby Keith video today. So view that if you're a Toby Keith fan at all. Thank you for watching. See you next time.
Tonight, the Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations coast to coast has brought you The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, the 17th in its weekly series of dramatic broadcasts featuring Orson Welles and the Mercury Theatre on the air.